I've been getting a lot of positive feedback on the first part of this series, and I would just like to thank everyone who's either reached out to me or watched the video. I don't think I can overstate just how nervous I was about uploading it, but the response so far has been absolutely amazing, even the inevitable disagreements with my choices. By the time this video is done, we'll be fully out of the weeds and into the tracks that have some real good qualities, and won't have me scraping the barrel trying to think of nice things to say. They won't stop scraping my hull to shit, however. So buckle up as another 10 tracks fall into place in the greatest and most objective review of them all, my Redout ranking. Something I've been conscious about in the construction of this list is lumping two tracks from the same environment together, especially since I've done it already with Schiaparelli and Curiosity. It's hard to focus on 60 tracks at once, yet there's a feeling that putting two tracks from the same environment together is lazy, as if I'm just filling out the numbers. That's exactly what I'm doing with Revolving here, but in my defense, I mix this track and Vertigo up constantly. Why? They both possess a similar defining feature. They're both short, tight tracks, and they both consistently do my nut in whenever I'm racing on or trying to beat my personal best in them. Revolving pips out Vertigo simply by virtue of not being an MS meta track. It could even be a lot of fun were it not for its weird inverted loop at the end, which is quite the tendency to chew you up and spit you out into the walls. Or should that be spit you out and let the walls chew you up? Either way. Yes, with practice you can minimise this chance, and yes, I've definitely run this track enough to be considered well practiced at it, but I still don't really get a kick out of it. At this point, getting good laps feels like a Pyrrhic victory when I consider how many others have been sacrificed for them. Acera meta tracks! Talk about rare! There are only a handful of these bad boys lying around, and as a die-hard Acera player, surely I should appreciate the opportunity to vie for a world record in the ship of my choice. Nope! Sapphire Grotto is absolute piss garbage. It's a track that never really gets going, despite some interesting technical parts. My main grief is really with the initial section. After the first turn, you're presented with a weird loop-de-loop that also twists horizontally as you go along it. Initial entry to it leaves you absolutely blinded by the glare of the sun, and then the Redout effect, which means you're strafing virtually blind to account for the constant shift in camber for the first half. Then, when it straightens out, you need to have the gift of foresight to not immediately slam into the wall of the following chicane. Yes, practice nullifies this, as does enough practice with anything. This would abolish a lot of tracks from their criticisms, but my time is finite, and there are much softer walls for me to bash my head against, so this excuse is invalid. Anyway, after the utter misery of the loop and the second chicane, things do get better. A vertical drop into a massive cave, leading into another jump and skimming across the water briefly before going underneath it. However, every corner bar in 2 is pretty much a square turn here, involving some vigorous use of both sticks to get around them in a decent fashion, which feels stifling against the sections that flowed more freely beforehand. It's a track having an identity crisis, and I am not qualified to help it discover itself. Next. Now I get Vertigo and Revolving mixed up a lot, but I can barely begin to remember which one is Durga and which one is Shiva when it comes to party rock. I'm not calling it P-AR219. Oh fuck. There is definitely some satisfaction to be had when cutting through this track, which has such thin margins for error, but that satisfaction only comes after repeated trial and error. Now this sounds like par for the course, but Durga differs from the usual process since you're not just learning the boost pattern and how to take each corner, you're learning how to anticipate them. You see, Durga fucking loves blind corners. The only thing it loves more is blind crests. Do you see that crest? It has a turn just behind it. Do you see this chicane? Oh, it rises up just as the direction changes. This straight section? It's going to twist and throw your craft off right before a sweeping turn in the opposite direction. Do you want to take a break and get some fast food? Well, you better not go to Burger King then, or you'll never escape their drive-thru in one piece. I had to revisit Durga to remember why I didn't like it, why my time spent grinding laps on it was so unsatisfying, so I could put it into words for this video. Now that I have, I wish I could forget it all over again. A disjointed mess of corners with a particularly egregious final section that leaves me wondering if developers were racing towards a deadline with this track. The location of the hardest platinum event in the career, and about the only item of note here, Drifting is a purely functional track with some funky little skips, and I would dare say it even does Asteroid's gimmick better. The first boost of the lap, coming out of the first hairpin, is tricky but so satisfying to get right, and leads into this downhill section that's open and fast. The track then tightens back up again just to keep you on your toes, capped off by an interesting exit from the second loop. It's an alright track, honestly, but being alright doesn't get you far as we've seen already. But that platinum. Followed shortly after the second hardest platinum in the game, which is incidentally also a Neptune track, the Debris Trophy really gives a shock to the senses. Other platinums were usually done in a handful of attempts, at least from my experience, but this was a definite roadblock. The finesse that is required of you, and the subsequent restarts that you'll do, felt very reminiscent of the old license tests in Gran Turismo, and the satisfaction of finally getting the top prize is definitely comparable to those games. Yet, somehow, without all those mines cluttering up the racing lines, this track feels oddly hollow. Most survival tracks are unbearable, but this felt so much more characterful with them. Alas. Striker, how on earth is this one of your top 5? Or should that be, how on moon is this one of your top 5? In terms of flow, it feels similar to Sapphire Grotto, in that it never really quite gets going. It teases you with these exciting set pieces, such as the first jump towards the titular reactor, but then after landing it flips the script with a technical section along a constant right-hander, whose only constant is the direction it's going in. The angle and camber change multiple times before you're finally farted out over a jump that's way too small for the speed of Class 4 ships. The worst aspect is the third jump, the one that goes through the teleporter. When you're on pace, you need to turbo boost as soon as you bounce off of the corner before it, but your view of the portal is obscured, so if you're slightly off angle, you'll find yourself slamming the portal frame instead. Talk about a moonshot. But when you do go through the portal, you then have to get yourself sorted out for the hairpin at the end of the following straight, and that means getting your craft ready for a wall bounce whilst in midair, accompanied by the moon's low gravity. It's surprising just how much that latter part can throw you off, and many a good lap has been ruined by just gently sailing over the barriers and into oblivion. With the claustrophobic middle section, the awkward jumps, and a start-finish straight that is way too curvy to be a straight and way too shallow to be a corner, Reactor is a track that never quite lets you get comfy with it. Cinta is one of the shortest tracks in the game. That puts it at a distinct disadvantage with other tracks because it doesn't have a lot of road with which to make an impression. That's not to say it makes the most of what it's got, however. The initial section is a straight that ascends in a staggered fashion before going over a blind crest into a drop down a hollowed out tree. That's pretty cool, until you remember that Glowing Caves, a track we'll be visiting later, has this latter feature as well, and is even in the same racing environment as Cinta. It's pleasant enough to hot lap on, with the only real challenge being the jump towards the end. The kill plane is quite far forward, and the fastest spot to land on is just in front of it. Beyond that though, Cinta doesn't really have much to offer, good or bad, and you know what I say about forgettable tracks. Hey, here comes another Acera meta track! Or, it was. I'll really do my best to withhold my feelings about Solha, because I don't want to get my channel banned, and plus I don't think anybody wants to hear me go on for an hour straight about one ship in a pokey indie racing game. Also, I have a hell of an axe to grind to the track itself, so let's focus on that. Contrary to most tracks this far down, I actually really enjoyed Unmanned at first. It was a great capstone to Abruzzo, and a nice difficulty bridge between that environment and the trickier volcano, but driving it in anger these days is fairly literal. Problems start immediately, with a jump right into a corner so steeply banked it might as well be a skateboard ramp. Casually, this is rad, but on time trials, you need to cut the corner as much as possible and perfect the landing so you don't get immediately flung into the walls and eat shit. A process that feels truly random in a game where the only variable tends to be the player's individual skill. Not great. The rest of this lap involves some narrow, whacked out roads that ideally require a heavy amount of strafing to navigate quickly and cleanly, but it's more than likely you'll need to adjust the steering at some point, which can cost as much time as hitting the walls themselves. It's a real bastard to get right, but I can't say it isn't an unenjoyable challenge. What is unenjoyable, however, is the final section, which when hot lapping needs you to turbo well in advance of the final jump, and if you really want to do it quick, you'll forgo the track altogether. So far, so normal for Redout, but the straightest line to the finish involves threading the needle between a kill plane and a massive fuck off branch. When I come to practice a track and time trial, one of the first things I identify are problem areas. These are areas that I'm either bad at and need to improve on, or are difficult to overcome, or God forbid, are both. Unmanned's final section definitely falls under both, not like the rest of it is particularly easy to begin with, so it's absolutely soul crushing to be on pace for a new personal best, and a slight error in the last 5 seconds undoes all of your hard work. The track name is appropriate at least, because I certainly want to abandon it. I kind of feel bad for the Cairo complex, because with it being the introduction for every Redout player, there's an impetus to make the track simple enough for people to cut their teeth on. For the most part, this means that its tracks are not all that memorable, but Samum tries, bless its heart. Its defining feature is found right at the end with a big jump. There's not much separation between the track pieces, so you can land early, but if you're feeling brave, and also want to go fast, you can keep flying all the way to the entry of the first corner, which feels more thrilling than it should thanks to the rows of dilapidated buildings on each side of the track, enhancing the sense of speed. Actually, now that I think about it, Samum has a nice duality here. You start off in the city and it's a technical challenge, but then it opens up as you put that behind you and start zipping past oases and barrel through canyons, with mankind's only interference being the road you're on. It's a fleeting feeling of freedom, however, as you're quickly corralled back into taking that jump over the start-finish line. You get a second or two to loom over the remnants of civilization before being dragged back down into the streets. I'm waxing poetic here, or at least trying to, and not talking much about how it feels to actually drive the track, but the jump and the track scenery overpower anything else that Samum has to offer. Beyond these, it's a fairly unassuming MS track, again, most likely if it being tied to the first racing environment. I'm really not one to open up another rant about MS just to fill out the time here, so let's move on to greener, or rather, magenta pastures. Frankly, this is Party Rock's answer to Sirocco, and the only reason I recognise this track now is... Wait a minute, I'm getting a bad sense of deja vu here. It's not like the feeling's not warranted. Solha MS rules the roost here, and Cali features 2 hairpins that, much like its sandy twin, require precariously hugging the inside of those corners for multiple seconds at a time for the fastest results. It's also pretty dull as far as track design goes, so is there anything of worth to Cali? Well, it is the introductory event to Party Rock, so it has the burden of presenting the environment's aesthetics to us, and thankfully it does this as well as it can. With the exception of one other track here, which we'll get to later, I would say Cali does the most in selling the location to us. It's a remote planetoid outside of our own solar system and once inhabited by a colony of miners. Redout's vibrant colour palette is put to great use here in conveying how inhospitable and alien the place is, emphasised all the more by the contrast that cold, grey colony buildings provide, clinging desperately to its craggy surface. The wild layouts and number of unique track features present across Party Rock's tracks is the cherry on top in painting this environment as a lurid fever dream more than a racing environment. Yet somehow Callie didn't get this memo. No loops, no jumps, nothing that really pushes the boundaries on track design, which leaves the track feeling rather domesticated despite the mad backdrop. I expect something a little bit more substantial for a track named after the Hindu goddess of death, but apparently it can't even kill my boredom when racing on it. Take note, Alaska. Here is an example of a short track done right, as it doesn't squander any of its running time and has plenty to keep you busy with, both technically and visually. I already went on at length about racing through city ruins in Samum, but CamSim fully commits to the bit here. I might even go as far to say it's the Monaco of Redout, albeit without the prestige. So maybe Baku then. Seriously though, it is fun to tear through those streets, and for me this is just about on the limit for what's acceptable in Class 4 racing when it comes to being slow and technical. The first few seconds are fairly gentle, lulling you into a false sense of security before the second half, punctuated by the only jump in this course, brings the knives out. As soon as you land, you need to swing a hard right to avoid the speed loss of hitting the wall, which is especially important since you've got to carry your momentum through the small straight and into the next corner afterwards. The corner's banked, so despite it being fairly tight, it lets you go in with a lot of bravery, which is good because you'll need a tidy exit for the final section. Normally you turbo out of corners when possible, but a pretty hefty chicane here puts paid to that thought. Taking a shallow line is crucial though, since it quickly opens up into the final straight and your last opportunity for a good boost. Right before you're greeted by the harshest hairpin in all of Redout. Even with 400 hours behind me, even with magnetic stabilizer behind me, it's impossible to take this cleanly without a cheeky stab of the brakes. The relative slowness of this corner can be ignored by the fact the start finish line is just in front of it, and whether you're doing a time trial or race, it always ends in a mad supersonic 100-meter dash to the end. It's great fun. I'm sounding pretty positive for a track languishing in the bottom 20, so what's the catch? Me and my continual feud with magnetic stabilizer? No, actually. Well, not entirely. It's certainly not the main cause for once. No, what actually rustles my jimmies here is the race experience, and the baffling lack of a no collision mode. I get it not being a thing in the career, that would at the very least break immersion, but in multiplayer? This wouldn't be such a big complaint if a collision didn't have such ruinous and random effects, from spin-outs to 90-degree turns to the wall. What is guaranteed is a dramatic loss of speed, time, and position, in that order. Now, remember how I likened this track to Monaco at the start? As with that circuit, there's not a lot of room to manoeuvre, so collisions are far more likely, and the results are less dramatic if only because you can still drive afterwards. But your race is fucked, and so is this track's chances of standing out among the crowd. Well, shit. Here we are again, and on April Fool's no less, my national holiday. 2 videos down, and 4 more to go. As before, feedback is always appreciated, either in the comments or pinging me in the Redout Discord, which you should totally join if you haven't already or are interested in the game. Of course, you're also welcome to share your opinion, though I doubt people need prompting in that one. This is the internet after all. But jokes aside, thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.